Most people think that once you move onto your own land, road laws stop applying. It sounds logical. After all, it's your land. But that's exactly where people get caught out. Some rules do change, others don't, and the point where private land meets the public highway catches more people than almost anything else we've covered in this chapter. Today, we're going to look at what actually changes when you move off the road, where people still get caught by driving law, and why understanding the differences can save you a great deal of trouble. Living on the road, waterways or off-grid in the UK, Dickie Dread. This is part 40 in the video series, and it's the last part in chapter 4, driving and navigation laws. And today, so moving on to land, what actually changes? When people move onto land, there is often an assumption that the driving rules, become less relevant. In some ways they do, but only in specific circumstances. If a vehicle is kept entirely off public roads, it can be declared SORN through the DVLA. This removes the requirement for tax and MOT. However, this only applies while the vehicle remains off-road. The moment it returns to a public highway, full compliance is required again. This creates a practical tension. Many off-grid setups rely on vehicles that are mostly static but occasionally moved. That occasional movement brings the vehicle back into full legal scope. Insurance becomes a judgment call. It may not be legally required for a SORN vehicle, but many people maintain it anyway due to the risk. So driving from land, where people get caught out. One of the most common misunderstandings in off-grid living is the idea that short journeys from private land are somehow exempt from road laws. They are not. The moment a vehicle enters a public road, even briefly, it must be taxed, insured and MOT compliant. There is no exception for distance, intention or necessity. This catches people out regularly. A short trip for supplies, quick run to a fuel station, even moving a vehicle a few metres onto a public highway can be enough to trigger enforcement if detected. Difficulty is that the boundary between private land and public highway is not always obvious. Tracks that appear private may still be largely classified as highways. So vehicles as dwellings on land. Using a vehicle as a home on land shifts the legal focus from road law to planning law. Even if the vehicle remains mobile, using it as a fixed place of residence can constitute a material change of use under the Town and Country Planning Act 1990. This is one of the key transitions between roadside and road-based living. On the road, the concern is usually parking and obstruction. On land, it becomes whether the land is being used residentially. And that was all covered in chapter 3, remember. The presence of a caravan or van does not automatically trigger enforcement. It is how the vehicle is used that matters. Duration, infrastructure and permanence all contribute. Again, see chapter 3. The grey area, what people actually do. There's always a gap between what the law says and what people do in practice. People keep vehicles SORN and move them occasionally. People drive short distances without full compliance. People live in vehicles on land without permission. Sometimes this continues without issue for years. Sometimes it ends quickly. The important point is not to pretend this gap does not exist, but to understand it clearly. The law is consistent in principle, but uneven in application. As with parking up, the same pattern emerges again and again. Visibility leads to complaint. Complaint leads to response. Road and water systems operate differently in form, but similarly in effect. Roads are controlled through surveillance and databases tied to vehicles and drivers. Waterways are controlled through licensing, mooring patterns, and visible use of space. In both cases, enforcement is rarely random, follows visibility, repetition, and complaint. And the last part in the chapter, final reality. Driving and navigation law have become tighter, more structured, and less forgiving. The days of slipping through unnoticed are largely gone. At the same time, the lived reality remains uneven. Not everyone is checked, not every breach is enforced, and not every situation is treated the same. For those living on the road or on land, the key is not just knowing the rules, but understanding how they are applied. Because in the end, it is not just legality that shapes outcome, it's visibility, pattern and response. Once you understand that, you're no longer guessing. So moving on to land changes some legal responsibilities, but it doesn't make the road laws disappear. Key is understanding exactly where one legal system ends and another begins. And that brings us to the end of chapter 4, where we've explored driving, vehicles and navigation, both on the road and on the waterways. In chapter 5, we move into a completely different area: weapons, hunting and rural law, beginning with what people can and can't legally possess when living off-grid or on rural land.